our ever-growing checklist before we start streaming is complete. We're live, and for once we've actually done a little bit of planning about what we're going to talk about tonight before we get distracted. And we're going to kick off. Saahil, after, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks back, you shared with us a list of 5 things that you thought were very important for enterprise portfolio management, and you wanted to bounce how much information to give away and how much not to give away. And Eric and I said, give it all away. And I saw you post on LinkedIn this week that said, here's 5 things you need to know about enterprise portfolio management. Tell us about the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for giving us just a little bit of a level set on where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago. I am going to, just for the sake of uh, context and clarity, I'm going to drop a link to the blog post specifically, not the LinkedIn post, into our stream in case anyone is curious about what the end result ended up being. So I thought long and hard about the uh, give it all away approach, and that's where I started to think about, yes, okay, we need to explain some aspects of enterprise portfolio management and really explain what we were trying to achieve. And then I had the opportunity to talk to Rebecca Davis from Scaled Agile, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't saying anything totally crazy from Safe's perspective, because we created enterprise portfolio management as a layer, a scaling level to lay on top of lean portfolio management, specifically to address the issues that really large enterprises were having around coordinating multiple portfolios. And because it was created in response to a specific problem that we were experiencing in one client, and I've had the opportunity to repeat it in a couple clients, I have been working with them to ensure that it is something that could scale up eventually, and I believe that that is a major initiative for them. So long story short, I had that conversation with Rebecca, who really told me the thing that was missing from what we had started to put together with these 5 key things was actually not, what's the recipe? It was, why does it matter? Um, we, we started to say, well, here are the things that you'd experience by not um, implementing EPM. We really focused on, you might have really good portfolio practices in your life, in your world, and as you start to coordinate, you might find that your portfolios are still pretty disconnected. And so we talked about these 5 key benefits and the pain points that you might feel. And what really crystallized for me is that Rebecca said, "You've told me a lot about how EPM might help me avoid some problems, but you haven't given me a wow moment to think, how is EPM going to save me?"
She's
Right?
really
You've
good at that.
mitigated some risks. Yeah.
She
Yeah,
loves
yeah,
that style
yeah,
of
I mean,
provocation, doesn't
it
she?
was brilliant. Um, she's so good, and it was brilliant because she really made me think about, wow, she's right, we talked a lot about mitigating risk, we talked about the pain you'll experience, but, eh, you know, some people don't transform because of a burning platform. Some people transform because of proactive leadership, right? They see that there's a future they want to avoid. And so not only did we need to focus on, how does EPM help you put out a fire, we also needed to talk about, why is it going to make a competitive difference for you in the future? What is nirvana going to look like when you're actually scaled this way? So we kind of reformatted the structure of the um, write up, article, blog post. I don't know what to call it. Uh, to talk about, well, here's each of the 5 things we had identified as a key benefit. So the first one we had identified was, alignment with business strategy. And that is probably the single most painful thing that a senior executive faces. Someone who sits at that, portfolio leadership or above the portfolio level, is trying to understand how multiple portfolios contribute to a common outcome or strategy. Um, and I would argue that in some organizations I've gone into, there is no cross portfolio strategy. There is no um, single guiding vision for the enterprise. And my opinion is that those are the organizations that we might be talking about in the next 5 to 10 years as Blockbuster and Kodak, and say, hey, if you don't have some overarching vision for where you want to go, you're going to end up splintering into a bunch of smaller businesses that are all really well run and optimized, but um, are truly independent from each other. Uh,
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
started to focus on, um, how EPM will help you win in each of these major areas. So I think rather than me running through everything we talked about and where it went, I'd love to just get your guys' reactions to that first.
Well, a couple things you stated in there I wanted to jump on. One is around the idea that companies don't have a cross enterprise spanning strategy versus the idea that they don't have an explicit strategy that's understood by all the people in all the businesses. Because I suspect that many of the
I think
ones that
that's
you're
a
talking
fair
about don't have that
clarification.
strategy.
Well, sure. I'm sure every CEO has a strategy, but how well is that communicated and understood, and how closely can the, VP, SVP of business unit A align to that strategy? Um, well, I just don't see it in practice. Right? We see a lot of, well, this is what my business is doing. I'm pretty confident that this is right for us, and business unit B can go figure out their own stuff.
It's funny because I don't hear that in the businesses I've worked with as much. What
That
I
is
hear is
interesting.
I hear the false belief that they're fully aligned.
Well, what,
And
like
I
everybody's in agreement that business unit A is doing the most valuable stuff for the company, so we should just keep focusing on that? Because I've heard that before.
Well, there's a little bit of that in some companies where it's like I worked with one where one division earned half the revenue and paid 100% of the bonuses because they were outperforming by 5%. I mean, and every other general manager in the company looked at that and said, "Yeah, we get it. We're not going to screw that up, even though we want to be special." Because they actually were mostly performing as well, but their underperformance would just disappear under the rug if that one succeeded, and everybody knew it. But
Yeah.
it's the compare notes
Uh,
test of it. Good.
I was gonna say, I mean, I have definitely seen that as well, and I would argue that that's probably not we're all, we have a false belief that we're all aligned. It's a we're being financially incentivized not to care.
Yeah. The more common case I've seen is you get five leaders, different business units, or even the same business unit, ask them write down the three most important things for the company, for the division, whatever, on a post-it note, and then compare notes across the leadership team. And a team that thought they were completely aligned and everybody had the same opinions will discover that they actually, among a group of five, had like almost no overlapping understanding of the strength of the common vision.
And there's no
Yeah, and
telling
it's
that you're busy
important.
rereading The Advantage at the moment, Eric.
I did this experiment before I read The Advantage, but I did just have it open this week.
um,
But I only had it open to pull his definition of organizational health, to be clear.
There you go. Um, I,
nice.
I think the other one that gets really interesting there is if you do that same exercise and you have those dot points from those five leaders, and then you go to the latest investor briefing they published and you test the level of alignment, that's when life gets
Mhm.
very interesting.
Well, Mark, I think you're right. It's interesting because I suspect if you take Eric's suggestion approach and say what are the three most common strategies, what are the three most common outcomes, or most valuable, not most common, what are the three most important outcomes, you get a very different answer than if you said what are the three most important initiatives. Right. And I
Hmm.
suspect that a lot of the time people will align on, you know, this is the most important work, and they don't think about what is that value being created? What is that? Why does that work matter? And then when you connect it to the financial outcomes, you start to have some really weird conversations about, are we doing the right things for, and for who? Right? Are we optimizing for, net revenue? Are we optimizing for max profit? We, pull in some of Luke's stuff around, organize around profit and see, put all of your energy, 80% of your energy into those 20% of things that are most profitable for you. Or do you start looking at future investment and looking at, do we think that these are going to have some impact on our quarterly financials 3 years from now that are still worth investing in?
So I'm going to throw one question out there, right? Here's my question. Do we, as agilists, have both the right and the equipment to challenge multi-billion-dollar enterprises about the way that they frame their enterprise strategy?
Do
I love
we, as agilists in general, or do we, as the four agilists sitting here and shaping agility? Because I'll give you two different answers to that question.
I'm going to say quite happily, we as the four people in this room, because I'll stick my hand up and say I don't have that right.
I disagree with you. I don't. I think that you've earned that right. I think that you, and that's what you're brought in to do. We are brought in specifically to challenge these foundational and fundamental assumptions that these organizations have about how they generate value. And in order to have a value driven conversation, you have to have enterprise strategy conversations. And I'm not saying that I have the right to tell you this is what your strategy should be, but I believe I have the right to come in and ask some difficult questions to help you, with your knowledge and understanding of your organization, better articulate your enterprise strategy.
Now see, that's a very different nuance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I
Look,
think
I'm not an expert in any of the businesses that I support, right? I should not be an executive for an oil and gas company. But
I think we often turn up as agilists and go, we're going to teach you how to suck eggs, right? You don't have a clear strategy. You're heading for being blockbuster. Blah 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 blah. We don't have the tools. We don't have the knowledge and the expertise in the field of most of our enterprise customers to be able to say this is a better strategy. We have tools to help them think about their strategy to an extent, but I would argue in the space of lean portfolio management and agility, most of what we have is the tools to help them execute on their strategy.
Yeah, so I just put a
I
link.
would go ahead, Eric.
I just put a link in our back channel. If you want to share it, Mark, it's on our screen mirror board. I've shared your view in a big way for a long time, and I think Mark, you and I have argued about this in various venues around the world over close to a decade now, probably. Um, but where we choose to play as agilists across these three zones, I think is a great place to pay attention to humility and what we're actually chartered to and safe to age to cover. And I found incredible power in that middle ground, which is where I'm asking my questions around, is it alignment and strategy? And I found a big concrete wall when I tried to go too far to the left in a domain I didn't truly understand.
Yeah.
Like I thought I did. And I'm an expert in absorbing and understanding business models, but I'm not going to sit down with an insurance executive and tell them anything about improving their float percentage in the context of this new product they're launching, blah, blah, blah.
So
And I think
Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, no, it's fine. I'm the one
Um,
who's trying to remind
yeah,
myself to put pauses every few sentences.
I look at the picture that you put up, and I think about what Mark said right before you shared this picture, and about, LPM really being focused on executing a strategy. And I would first, just to bring this back to EPM and the article that I published, I would say I think that's exactly the problem that I was trying to solve when we first conceptualized EPM, was to say, hey, there needs to be more of a direct focus on the enterprise strategy formulation and articulation. And 90% of LPM is focused on strategy deployment. I would agree with that, because it sits at the portfolio level and it assumes that there's already a clearly defined enterprise strategy being communicated via strategic themes and budgets, right? If you look at sort of how LPM is structured today, those are the inputs
so,
into portfolio strategy.
so
Um,
let me just pause you there for a second, because I think
yeah,
as soon as Eric said, "Hey, go to this diagram," I went, "What I'm probably really more focused on there on the LPM side is the articulation." And coming back to your point of, is it communicated? Are people connecting to it? I, I think we've got a scattering of tools that help in the formulation bit, but it's very easy to overstep there. But where we've got a real sweet spot is the articulation, the deployment. I know
yeah,
I get humbled every time I talk to true senior strategists in enterprises. You walk into the room thinking you're an expert, and it is humbling.
agreed.
Yeah, and I
Um,
want to
Eric, I saw you
and I want
shaking
to
your
make a
head when
point.
I.
Sorry, Bill. Well, I want to make a point. This doesn't say LPM or portfolio level anywhere on that diagram. So this flow, I apply it for product strategy, I apply it for portfolio strategy, I apply it for enterprise strategy. And your point
All
is well
true,
taken.
and
Your point is well taken. If you don't have a enveloping strategy that is informing and constraining your local strategy, then that local strategy will become unmoored from the purpose of the enterprise. Like that's kind of Jeffrey Moore plus Lencioni 101.
I,
The two of two, I
you're
guess.
absolutely right. And so my mental model when I was thinking about this was, because this is just a strategy flow, right? And so there's portfolio strategy and there's enterprise strategy. And what I was thinking, when I looked at this picture, was EPM, as we're writing it, is really focused on formulation and articulation. And then the way EPM is deployed is through LPM. So to me, there's now a handoff to LPM structure where there's still formulation, articulation, and deployment, of a strategy. And that LPM deployment looks like epics and agile release trains. And the formulation is a partnership with EPM to understand how your portfolio contributes to the enterprise strategy. And that articulation comes in the form of a portfolio Kanban where you're going through, continuous exploration and market sensing and all of that stuff. So to me, this is a
Yeah.
very clear, like the same way we say, hey, you have a continuous delivery pipeline at every level of the organization, the same way you have a Kanban at every level of the organization, you have this strategy convergence at every level as well. We could even argue that this is true at the actual release train level. As you intake uh, epics, turn them into features, and deploy them as stories, you're doing this, right? But it's a product strategy. Um, and so, yeah, to me, I just see there's a nested level of strategy. I love the way you described it as, local strategy and an enveloping strategy. Um, and so for me, EPM, needs to be stronger in tools for strategy formulation. I think we're pretty solid on articulation the way we've written it so far. That can then be a clear, handoff and direction to each portfolio to then go and create their own strategy. I will come back to, I still think that LPM as written today is more focused on strategy deployment. Um, and less on articulation. But the reason I say that is because if you even think about the four guardrails, they're really about how do you deploy your funding to best match your strategy. It's how where am I actually investing? And the second I spend money, in my mind, I'm deploying a strategy.
Mhm. No, I support that view with the caveat that LPM is a tool for deploying enterprise strategy.
Ow. Yes. I just banged my finger against my
I'm
desk.
sorry, did I hurt? I usually hurt people's brains, not their fingers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. 100%. LPM should be a tool for deploying enterprise strategy. The reality I see a lot today is I go in somewhere, they say we need help launching a portfolio, and they're inventing their own strategy, right? They're still, they're doing all the practices well and flowing a portfolio strategy or a business unit strategy or a division strategy, whatever they want to call it, into their scope of control, their sphere of control, but they don't always have a good connection to the enterprise. And that was the problem we
Yeah,
wanted to solve with EPM.
yeah. As you played with this, and I'm bouncing a few different contexts in my head. Have you found techniques to test for the situation where people don't have visibility to the strategy because it's perceived as a protected thing that should not be shared?
Yes. So, like I said, I've implemented some EPM practices in three different organizations now, and we've run into that in all three organizations. In one of them, it was an aerospace and defense company, and it's not just it should not be shared. It's hey, these are secret, classified. We can't talk about this beyond a very high level. In an energy company, in a financial services company, it was spheres of control and influence. This is my domain. I don't want, someone else to get credit for this kind of stuff. There's a lot of local human, um let's just call it humanness getting involved in the way of
Mhm.
executing. And so for me, having implemented this a few times, what I've learned is that the practices are really great for providing structure, but this becomes a very human connection based set of conversations, right? The changing hearts and minds part, the sustaining change, building momentum for thinking about this different. We're talking about changing the hearts and minds not of middle managers who are historically very resistant. We're talking about changing the hearts and minds of senior vice presidents who are historically very successful in the old way of working, right? They know how to navigate the current state bureaucracy and political landscape of their organization, and they are successful, powerful individuals. And so when we come in and say, hey, we want to change the way you manage your strategy, when we want to change the way you are delivering against your work, we have to show them, I understand your concerns. I understand why you feel that this might be an issue, but we come back to the strategic misalignment and the lack of adaptability and say, think about how much better it could be. Think about how much easier it could be. Think about how you would have been able to leverage this opportunity to create these outcomes much faster and start to um, build some momentum for let's do an experiment. Let's try it, right? Even if it's just in one aspect of your sphere, let's experiment on this and see if we can't um, generate some wins. The other aspect of it that I found is successful is sometimes like if we dive into some of the specific practices which don't really appear in this article, but I I have never met a executive that doesn't love the idea of my enterprise strategy room, right? We talk about this as one place where you can see everything in your organization, right? An enterprise strategy room is one room where I can see the current state of every portfolio in the business. I want to see their portfolio kanbans. I want to see, sort of their capacity allocations, how the work is aligning to their investment horizons. I can see, by value stream, any major risks or challenges to delivery inside the value stream, and we try to keep that as real time as possible. And I have never met someone who doesn't immediately love that idea. Even when they say, I don't, this is secret, this is something that not everybody needs to know about, we can agnosticize it. We can, make it so that the secret isn't given away, but you still have real time visibility or near real time visibility into progress. And executives love that, man. They feel like it gives them more control. They can be even more of a um, quarterback, to use a sports metaphor, than they are already. Um,
Right.
and sorry, so Eric, you put me on down a rabbit hole of how do I manage resistance to change with EPM. I hope I didn't go too deep for you.
I'll claim credit for putting you in that rabbit hole. That was great. Um, I'm amused with the symbology now as you were talking, though, of an enterprise strategy room with a key-coded door lock that only certain people can enter. I just waiting for that to happen somewhere. As opposed to it being a tool for
Well,
an
to be honest, that is in the aerospace and defense company. That is a thing that happened.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what they ended up doing was they ended up replicating the ESRs, the enterprise strategy rooms, for each portfolio. And then those had their own sort of key coded lock for, inside the portfolio, inside the business unit. There's a different audience that needs to see this every day and are allowed, permitted to see this, and that doesn't cross portfolios. But um, the unintended benefit of having the room, even when it was key coded, was suddenly my business unit leaders, my SVPs, so to speak, were seeing, they were more aware of what was going on in the other portfolios when they
Yeah.
used to be completely siloed. So,
Mhm.
while they weren't necessarily ready to have cross portfolio conversations, just having that awareness allowed them to make better decisions locally.
So
Well, and I bet it decreased the amount of micromanagement that you saw from every
Mm.
individual who had access to that room, because could be much more
Absolutely.
comforted that it existed.
so
Go
I,
ahead,
And
Mark.
it allowed
I
for earlier intervention when they did need to intervene.
I'm going to draw a parallel and then be cheeky. Here's the parallel. It feels like what you're describing is what Mullally did in American Icon with his weekly, yeah,
Yep,
So
that is
I'm
weekly
exactly
not
all
that.
deck
I
meeting,
will
right?
confess that I'm not familiar with that. I
Okay,
don't know what you're talking
so put it
about.
right now.
I'll grab the
Go.
reference and put it in the stream.
Eric's putting it on the stream chat. Put it on your reading backlog. American Icon. Um,
It is in my one of my top 5 business book recommendations for
yeah, same.
aspiring agile leaders.
Yep, absolutely. Brilliant book.
Well, it is now on my list to read.
It's the turnaround of Ford story. But that's its own little rabbit hole. The comment I was going to make, looking at all of this, if I flip back to Eric's visual, everything you've just talked about is actually strategy, articulation, and deployment.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
That they had a strategy that needed the world lined up, aligned, and informed on their
Yeah, yes, agreed.
interpretation.
Right. And a common interpretation.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Paragraph 2.
Um Thank you. This is deployment, right? It's resource optimization. we were starting to talk about, are we building the right things at the right time, and are we building them right? And once you can start having that conversation about, are we building them right, you can start to really investigate, um are we optimally structured with the capabilities and resources that we have today,
What do you
right?
do with your
Did we put
people?
the right people on the right, huh?
What do you do with your people?
I'm not sure that I understand your
I'm
question.
being an agile guy going, people aren't resources. I'm allergic reactioning
um
to an agile article that calls people resources.
so I understand. Look, we can have this conversation. I totally understand where that movement came from, and I understand the idea that people aren't resources, people are people, and I agree with it. I do, right? We have to. But that comes back to respect for people. Um, we have had some people try to rebrand it as like human capability management, right? HCM as opposed to HR, human resources versus human capability management. And words matter, they do. But when you start to talk about enterprise capabilities and what can you do with the resources that you have, people and their knowledge and capabilities are a resource. Now, I think the problem we need to solve is that doesn't mean they're not people anymore, right? Respect for people and culture is a core value of SAFe. It should also just be a core value of being a good human, right? Can we separate that from, we also need to understand the capabilities of the people inside our organization and how to effectively deploy them?
No, it's all right. You can talk about them like that now. I had to have a poke.
uh, yeah. Yeah, Mark, you got me, man. I'm sitting here like, all right, all right. Uh, I'm gonna change the language. I will change the language around how I talk about this, but I would like to believe that we, at least all four of us, are in agreement that people are people, and no matter how you're planning for people allocation and optimization, you'll have respect for them.
What
Wolfgang,
I've
thank
also
you.
seen way too many Agilists get themselves booted for trying to have the people not resources conversation too many times too rapidly.
Yeah, yes, but
But
I mean, again, it comes back to, what problem are you solving, right? We're trying to get leaders to stop thinking about people as a resource that can be consumed, right? It's not, hey, I have people, I can, burn the midnight oil and make them work nights and weekends forever until they quit.
Yeah. Look, you're
And back
talking about,
to
if I gave you another metaphor, you're talking about supply and demand and mirror and mirror, just to put your lean hat on, right?
I just
Mhm.
I'm just laughing because there's one exec I was working with that we were joking at the people not resources, and he's like, no, they're clearly assets. We should capitalize them. And he knew
Uh,
exactly how much of a smartass he was being, but it was like that's the sass we need.
oh yeah. Could you imagine if we started capitalizing on individuals? What's the depreciated value of this employee over time?
It
Like,
depends. It
that's
depends
pretty
how
Well,
long
they
messed
you've.
up.
appreciate
It,
for
it, it depends how long you've managed them as a resource.
Yeah.
it.
Oh
um,
gosh.
I think
All right.
Um,
there's a different point here I'd love to dig into that's actually on topic though, and it's a bit of a tangent, but it's what are your thoughts on intentional over allocation and the fact that we should have an oversubscribed portfolio, but also the ability to kill things as part of the execution of that portfolio?
I love it. I mean, to me, that's assume variability, preserve options, right? We are going to work on a lot of things up front, knowing that we don't have the capacity to deliver them all, so that as we get some early feedback, we can eliminate some, right? But that we have to be able to pivot and reallocate our human technology and financial resources to to the things that are starting to make sense, right? As we continue to build and get feedback. So I think that that's a great strategy, assuming that your organization is capable of making those pivots.
Can I ask a question though on that front? And now I'm going to be less naughty, but if I look at Eric's question, and for the sake of things at the moment, let's say LPM versus APM, as a simple labeling question, because I think we're trying to apply lane tools at both levels. But that kind of, are we going to overload it? What's coming in and out? To me, there's a very different type of supply and demand conversation happening at a lower level portfolio to what there is at a strategic portfolio. Because I'd argue in a strategic portfolio, we're really not talking about work items. We're talking about allocation of intent to lower level portfolios. So I wonder, how do we manage that? What conversation happens at what level?
Well, I mean, again, I agree with you, right? And I would perceive EPM as being an input to LPM, right? The conversations happening at that enterprise strategic level are further future looking and should be happening further in advance than what is coming down to a portfolio to manage its strategy. If you have the chance to look at my Prague or Nashville presentations on EPM, you'd see we talk about at the enterprise level, we're determining, 5-year strategic themes as OKRs for the enterprise, and then breaking that out into 3-year and 1-year epics for the portfolios, enterprise epics for the portfolios. Um, and so we're already trying to manage that by saying, at the 5-year strategic theme level, the resource optimization conversation we're having is about, are we investing the right amount of dollars into each portfolio? Are we uh, building the right capabilities and skill sets, right? Because we're thinking 5 years out. Now we have the time to go higher, right? We're saying, hey, if we're going to invest in this, we need to build the knowledge and capability inside the organization. We need this portfolio to go hire 100 people that are machine learning engineers or something like that well in advance.
Yeah.
And that is the enterprise strategic,
Yes.
formulation. And then as it comes down to the portfolio, it's less about that and more about, uh, do we have the right art structure and the epics well understood to go invest in executing against this vision? But the portfolio, if we come, you could even come back to that idea of intentional architecture and emergent design and talk about it as like intentional strategy versus emergent execution or something like that, to say the enterprise is giving you the boundaries and the portfolio is then innovating with the resources and capabilities that they have to best deliver against that design.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really where the concept of guardrails arose from in the first place. But it wasn't set against the context as of the original writing and of a world of multiple portfolios. There was an assumption kind of that it was a single portfolio, and we were all kind of working together to shape that strategy and evolve it, and that the LPM execs were the enterprise execs in many companies. And
I
that's
mean,
not the case with some
in the
organizations now.
you know, I'm not even going to say small to medium sized businesses. In some large businesses, that's still true, right? We really only identified this problem of enterprise strategy to portfolio execution when we got to those mega huge enterprises, right? Like the Fortune 100 companies that have 5 major business units that could all be operating as independent companies if they wanted to.
So I'm gonna be careful with that one because I see the gap between the enterprise strategy and the technology portfolio execution at every scale company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like originally, that's kind of where LPM sat, was managing that interface between what is the business trying to achieve strategically and what is the technology portfolio capable of delivering tactically and strategically.
So I don't disagree with you, but I think you narrowed the scope a little bit because you started to talk about
Mhm.
the technology portfolio,
Yep.
right? And from that lens and that perspective, absolutely, right? There was a huge gap between where's the business trying to go and what technologically are we capable of doing and supporting. And I would, argue if we put up some of the like major enterprise strategic themes that we've been working on, we'd see technology is just one contributor to that execution. It's no longer like a primary focus of the execution. It's just one
Mhm.
capability of how are we getting there.
Can, can I offer
Mar-
maybe a slightly different angle on that? So if you go all the way back to Safe One, right? And the pretty slides we had back in Safe One.
We're gonna we're gonna pull the old guy card here, the old safe guy.
Well, if you got
Back
it,
when I was just an
if
SPC.
if you got it, flaunt it. No. So if you look back at Safe One, Dean would say a portfolio represents an instance of Safe, right? And for a long time, that's what he did, right? At some point, we
I
kind of
forgot about that
de-geeked it
language.
because we didn't like to talk about instances anymore because it sounded like we were programmers still. But um, there was an argument that said if you looked at a big picture, right, before with portfolio and trains, you were looking at an instance of Safe, and a large enterprise would have multiple instances of Safe. And I think my suggestion would be that the discussion about EPM is recognizing some messy reality, right? And the messy reality is if you look at that notion of the instance of Safe for a portfolio that we had in the beginning, it assumed that you could relatively cleanly get those instances to be self-contained, right? There was a reality that said life is never neat. Life's messy. We've got cross-cutting stuff that needs to be coordinated across
Mm,
multiple portfolios. We've got portfolios that need help from other portfolios, right? And actually, sometimes portfolios like to be a law unto themselves, and we'd like to constrain that a little bit, make sure they know where they're meant to play in our enterprise strategy. So I think we've always been recognizing the fact that there might be multiple portfolios. It's just now we're going, well, life is messy and there's serious problems to solve strategically because of the fact that there's going to be multiple portfolios in any meaningfully sized company.
so if you had just described that as if Safe was a software company, we would have described that as a feature deployment pattern. We would have said, yeah, we understand that, but it's easier to go to market with a portfolio that is self-contained that we can build the practices around, and then we'll enhance later to get to cross-portfolio. Um, so that, I mean, as a journey, that totally makes sense to me. And I just think that's where we are now, right?
Yeah.
We're now at the point where we need to start addressing these more tactically and more intentionally.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull the thread back together here of where we've come from on this. Because it's really interesting. I don't think any of us argue that we need something to stitch portfolios together in a
Yeah.
healthy way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we need to be intentional when we talk about it, though, that when we say enterprise strategy, we don't necessarily always mean multiple portfolios. And there's two different gaps that we're trying to close here. There's two different problems we need to solve with an enterprise strategy conversation. One of which is the direct relationship of what is the goals of the company as it relates to the goals of a portfolio, which may be the only portfolio.
Mhm.
And then there's the conversation of, in pursuit of a larger strategy, how do multiple portfolios need to collaborate? And I think those are related, interdependent, but different conversations. And it's easy to munch them both together and assume that EPM is trying to solve both of them. And I don't think we actually serve ourselves if we let EPM become synonymous with enterprise strategy deployment, because I don't think it is.
It No, you're right. It is equally cross-portfolio coordination.
Hmm.
Um, so speaking of, I know that we have other topics we wanted to cover today. So maybe we hit, because the next three benefits are all connected in my mind. They are part of cross-portfolio coordination as opposed to enterprise strategy. Um, and so if we just look at them, we're talking about risk management, we're talking about decision making support, right? Make better decisions with data and with alignment, and accountability and governance across portfolios. Um, so Eric, I actually think you very effectively just described the two components of EPM, and we could break up the five benefits very cleanly into those two components of enterprise strategy formulation and articulation and cross portfolio coordination.
So
And I think, and just
Uh,
to,
go,
just to
Eric.
put a pin on that, though, I think it's important to make it clear in any multi-portfolio conversation that attempting to align without a shared understanding of what the strategy is kind of pointless.
Yeah.
You're doing dependency management at that point, not alignment.
yeah, agree. Well, it's even worse than that. It's what are you aligning to, right? What are you
Well, that's the
coordinating?
thing.
Right? Yeah,
Alignment is
it's
pointless if you don't
yeah,
have a shared understanding of the goal.
right.
But I think it's important that we, for me, and I did an entire Safe Summit presentation on this years ago. So, like, I think it is important that we get tight on our language of, are we talking about articulating a poorly understood strategy, or are we telling executives you don't have a strategy? And those are very different statements. I mean, I was talking to a CEO of a relatively small $20 million startup, and he's asking me if I want to come and facilitate his all company meeting in January as a retreat. And I'm like, well, how is your strategy? And do you have something that you've shared with the board for the last 4 quarters? He's like, absolutely. And it's getting better and it's more refined. I'm like, and how well do people understand that? He's like, that's why I want you to come. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, right there, we're doing articulation, not formulation.
Yeah.
Right. I hear what you're saying, right? I would argue that every organization has a strategy, whether it's a good strategy, whether it's well understood, whether it's defined and aligned. It's the same thing we say about every train has a continuous delivery pipeline. It just might be a really bad one with a ton of manual work and automation, but it exists with a ton of manual work and no automation. Um, it exists, and we're trying to optimize it. Right? There's got to be something, even if it's just
Mhm.
some person's opinion. Some executive is making decisions based off of some mental model they have. That mental model has some foundation that is the enterprise strategy. It just may not
Yep.
be communicated, articulated, or understood. And we're trying to flesh that out and allow people to better understand it and consume it. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday about his organization, and he was complaining about, we had a conversation where they just published a new strategy for the company, and it's 30 by 30 is the strategy. It's $30 billion by 2030. And he called me and he said, this isn't a strategy, it's barely a goal. Right? It doesn't communicate anything except a revenue target, but that's what they have. Right? And you can at least start to make some decisions around, well, does the work we're doing today, is it going to meaningfully contribute to making more money by 2030? Maybe. Right? But we could probably better articulate that and say, here are the various major initiatives. We're going to improve our technology landscape. We're going to make faster decision making. We're going to do more collaborations with our competitors. I don't know, but like we could say, here are the things that we're going to do to create a financial goal. Anyway, all of that to say, there's a lot of work to be done in this space. We're still advancing it. Scaled Agile is doing some really cool stuff around this. I feel like I'm getting to do some really cool stuff around this, and we want your support. We want your help. I value you guys so much, and for any viewers, if you want to get involved in these conversations, please do so, because this is how the magic is made, right? This is how SAFe continues to advance the framework. This is how we'll continue to make EPM better, is by hearing stories, seeing what works and what doesn't, and putting together our success patterns.
Yep. Well, that
along,
is
along with a little bit of torture.
Well, yeah, but we're a bunch of masochists, so we like that part.
But I do want to highlight, and this is maybe full circle on where Mark took it at the beginning. There be dragons in formulation. Be very careful as a coach, as a consultant, even for us as fellows and SBCTs. That's a space that for a company of any meaningful size, unless you have a financial management background and a keen understanding of the market, that's not the consulting we probably do. But we do facilitate the articulation process. We help people see when their strategies aren't clearly articulated. And we may look at the strategy and say, you don't have enough materiality here for us to do anything with. And that's not evaluating the strategy from an efficacy point of view. That's evaluating the strategy from have you articulated it at all? Or have you just said 30 by 30 or twice in half, or the catchphrases? Because a catchphrase is a strategy, and we can call that out. I think we just need to be very intentional for our own sakes, but also for the sakes of people listening, what we are advising people to dive into, and put some boundaries, not in a don't go there, but in a you're going past this warning rope right now. There might be some cliffs over there, and there's some big career cliffs out there.
I totally agree with you. I will be the first person to say I'm not an enterprise strategist. On a side note, Hic Sunt Dracone might be a pretty good logo or slogan for our podcast and stream. Here be dragons. Because if I remember correctly, the phrase came from map makers saying, here's unexplored territory, it's dangerous, don't go there. Or if you are going to go there, be very careful.
Which
I
does
don't know, Eric.
sound like where we
feel
love
like
to
you
play.
Sorry, Mark, what?
I said it sounds like where we love to play.
Yeah, I really think Eric might have just hit on something.
When I get back to Mexico, you'll see my office is decorated with maps. So I am all in favor of bringing cartography as a metaphor into our stream.
I love it. Here be dragons.
And if you don't forget until people follow to explore themselves, the map makers get to define the reality in people's imaginations.
That's true. All right.
Then you
Well,
find out where the map is.
I appreciate the deep dive into EPM. I know we're going to talk about EPM more in future sessions, but we had a lot of other exciting stuff we wanted to talk about today. So I will turn it back over to anyone else.
I'll cue Mark to show my closing image for amusement then.
Let me just find you on the Miro. I'm off in other places. Where are you? Okay.
Right below the other one I had.
I want to know what the rest of the mug says. I can't even.
It's just that phrase. I just can't even. It was a joke mug on that, and I just had all these ingredients in my kitchen when I lived in Boulder, and I was like, I hung up that annual strategy as a one-pager in a frame and took a picture of that as well for some presentation I did years ago. But I thought this was particularly relevant to our conversation. And I take particular pride in the dates
Yeah.
on it because that was what I was recoiling at the time.
The dates are glorious.
You guys have me like sticking my head all the way in there to see the dates. I should look at the mural
Here's them in
instead
there.
of on the screen.
I can always. There we go. You should be able to see the dates now. We are zoomed up.
Nice.
Although we should, if we didn't have to check this, Mark, we should probably share your share link so we can see it in real time rather than through the stream.
That would probably be useful. Let me get you the share link somewhere. Here we are.
It also doesn't help that I, don't wear my glasses when we're streaming because the glare on my glasses makes it a little tough.
You've been noticing me, like, I've got my ear things like an inch or two above my ears, so I get the angle down, and I can still kind of see.
That's smart. My brother just got LASIK, and I keep thinking, man, that feels so efficient. I'm just a coward.
So
I'm not yet qualified.
Moving forwards, I've just finished first run of my lean portfolio management boot camp, which I am full of stories about. But in terms of keeping tonight a little bit more varied, I actually feel like I'm going to save the insights from this week's boot camp for another stream and go, Wolfgang's just sat and smiled and gives us thumbs up all night. You wanted to talk about collaboration maps tonight, Wolfgang.
So I was listening and I really enjoyed that. Great. So I toyed around with artificial intelligence. So this is a picture actually taken from Midjourney. So Midjourney helped me a lot the last 2 weeks in creating images.
It's so much fun with Midjourney.
So I now have like 5 AI tools which I use on a daily basis. And they interact really great together. Now, this is a larger presentation and with way too many slides. Up to now, it's almost 150, setting up solution trains in 5 steps. But so here, this is a part of the first step. And this is also a picture that Midjourney created, identifying collaboration needs. And this is not only about collaboration maps, but mainly about collaboration maps. And I'm jumping here to this first part. So collaboration maps are essentially just something where you could draw people with their names and with whom they have to interact, like social networks. So this is taken from Wikipedia, just the pictures which usually depict social networks or collaboration networks. Now, when I started thinking about these collaboration maps years ago, and I started creating them in the transformation that I was part of, then of course, like the normal thing is to start at the personal level. Like here are people, and they have to interact with one another, and where are strong bonds between the people. And on that level, on the first scaling level, so to speak, you can already identify teams. If we stay with the Scrum paradigm, then we have maybe like 10 people in a team. And then you can go to the next level, say, okay, a second scaling level, meaning what I usually call the solution areas, like 10 to 40 people or something, or 50 people. Now, this is pretty much the same picture that this one. So the only thing is that on the second scaling level, you are not caring for the interactions of the people themselves within the teams because they are pretty self-organized. What you're caring for on the second level is just the interaction between the different solution areas. And so on that level, you can then come up with ideas of agile release trains. Like you can group a couple of these solution areas together to create agile release trains. Now, you are not really caring about individual people anymore on that level, so you can just erase them, and then you get this picture. And of course, then you can do a bit of abstraction and say, okay, now we can visualize the teams actually as small dots, and the solution areas as circles around them. So, and the same thing you can do on the third scaling level, on the agile release train level, saying, okay, we start with our dots being the teams, and our, so this is wrong here, I'm still working on that slide deck, and our circles are the solution areas. And now we are not even caring about the collaboration within the solution areas anymore. So we erase all the collaboration within the solution areas and say, this is pretty much self-organized. We are only caring about the dependencies between the solution areas. And then you come up with a picture like that, where you could say, okay, now these are the agile release trains. The green circles are the agile release trains. And we are trying to get that into more abstract form, saying, okay, now the small dots are just the solution areas. Sometimes a team remains, because there may be teams which are not part of a solution area, like standalone teams. And now the green circles are the agile release trains. And then on the next level, and this is where I hadn't had time to carry on anymore. On the next level, we are doing the same game. Like now we are looking at the agile release trains, and we're coming up with patterns for the solution trains. Now, why is that important for me? And this is a central aspect. Like over the years, it has become a central aspect of the work that I'm doing. The one thing is because with these interviews that I'm doing to create the first level of these maps, and also the other levels, I focus on the communication and collaboration needs. It's not anymore like, hey, here are the events and artifacts and roles, and follow the rules. But tell me what your communication and collaboration needs are. With whom do you have to work together on a regular basis? Or with which people do you have to work together every sprint, so that you are able to do your work? And so this gets me out of this idea of here is the recipe, just follow the rules, and gets me more into thinking what could help the people more, like pair programming strategies or synchronized events or whatever. The other thing is that, and I put that here on that slide, where is it? So of course, like these maps are dynamic. This is what these maps are all about. So they are dynamic. They have to change over time. But what I wanted to, this one here. So the mapping of complex value stream networks is not a linear process. And this is something that I really believe in. I think this is something that is not well understood yet. It's more like we are still in this lean paradigm of machines in a row, and then there are value creation steps one after each other, which is not really true in complex environments. So to understand a complex value stream network, it takes many different perspectives on the value stream landscape. So this is really just my personal belief. Only the superposition of these different perspectives creates an approximation of the value stream network. And collaboration maps are one aspect of value stream networks for me. So it's not that this is the way to a new way of value stream mapping or anything. It's just a different perspective. Like you could have user journey maps, or you could focus on waste. Where is waste happening? And now you have a lot of different perspectives on the whole thing, and from that emerges like a better understanding of the value stream networks than with this linear process mapping. So these collaboration maps are really like a central part of the work that I'm doing, and for both reasons. Like I have to understand it's my belief that I have to understand the communication and collaboration needs first to design the organizational architecture around that. And this is the first step for me always to go into value stream mapping. to understand value stream mapping from a collaboration point of view. It's not the only point of view, of course, it's just one. But this is usually my entry point, saying, hey, we are already in an environment where people are working. It's not a greenfield environment. The people are probably working for a long time on their products already. And they may or may not be already in an agile transformation, but they already have their ways of working. And I want to understand these ways of working first before I go in with other means of drawing value stream networks. And so this is something that I never read anywhere, or I never had any conversations about that. I didn't even gave speeches about that, because actually I considered it so basic that I've never even thought about giving a speech or writing something about it. But lately there were more and more people approaching me saying, hey, you're doing these collaboration networks. Can we learn about that? And I will also have another speech on Tuesday next week about this topic. And so I was really curious about whether you are using that also, because it's so basic, or whether you have any other sources like books or anything else to draw from, if other people are doing that already.
So maybe I'd start by saying, have a look at the work that Esther Darby and Don Gray do with containers, agents, and differences. So it's...
I always credited that to That's funny.
Sorry, who'd you credit it to?
Containers, differences, and exchanges by Cone.
No, no, it's not actually. I think there's a possibility it's Glenda Eoyang. And I never know how to pronounce her name. So I know Esther doesn't say, hey, this is the model I came up with, but I know it's a model she loves using. And I'm pretty sure the source of it, and the backstory for me was going to Esther and saying, I'm really interested in complexity theory and human systems, but Cynefin has personality problems for me in terms of engaging with it. So can you recommend somewhere else? And she sent me off this author, Glenda Eoyang, who was applying complexity and chaos theory to organizational change and human systems. Brilliant stuff. And I'm pretty sure she's the source of it. But Esther and Don have written heaps on it over the years. They've run a lot of workshops. So I'd definitely be looking there, Wolfgang. Have you played with it much, Eric?
I've used it as a mental map or mental model for a number of years.
Yeah.
This looks like a reasonable link directly to work about Glenda. It's an excerpt from her that appears to be 15 pages. And according to Bard, as my new original data sources, traces back to the early 90s, and I think it is consistent with from Glenda. With that, for the purposes of this search, of course. But I've used it extensively as a way of doing this kind of mapping for a decade. I mean, it was something the Lean Kanban community was keen on back in the day, understanding how people actually collaborate, not how the process says they should. But also I learned about it originally from my Cone, probably via Esther and others, sounds like, through some blog posts. And it's a tool I use for team chartering. I love the dynamic discovery elements you have in here, Wolfgang, of using interviews to emerge these. But from a team charter point of view, what is the team's container? What's it funded to? What makes it different than other teams? Who are the teams it needs to work with? And I have a circular model. I don't know if I can dig it out in Miro quickly enough, that actually assembles into a network diagram where each team is a node. And it has the team's interview in the circle, and it has a set of things outside for the upstream and downstream teams on the value network, on the journey, and the supporting teams and the supported teams from a platform perspective. So it creates a horizontal and a vertical stack view on a wall, physically using the team's charters.
This is interesting. Do you have a picture of such a thing?
I don't have a picture. I might have a Miro.
I've just been madly Googling to go.
I've been looking too.
I'm not confident enough to go here. I'll just start drawing it on the Miro, because I don't know that I'd do it justice. But I'm wondering whether I'm going to our streaming backlog, and I'm adding containers difference agents, because there's a really powerful way of thinking about a human system.
Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious about this statement that I made here. Do you agree on that? Like I'm saying here on that slide, the mapping of complex value stream networks is not a linear process. To understand a complex value stream network, it takes many different perspectives on the value stream landscape. Only the superposition of these different perspectives create an approximation of the value stream network. Is that something you would agree on?
No, 100%. I mean, they're not linear. They are. I mean, even at any one dimension we start to poke at starts to carry infinite complexity in it. Look at the concept of like architectural dependencies. There's runtime dependencies. I depend on these 37 services to operate, but I have no design or change time dependencies. I'm not influencing those at all. That is in a value stream map. I assume these services and they need to evolve with me, and I need to work with another team in order to evolve them. One's a team topology design, and one is a co-evolution collaboration over a period of time topology design. And that's just on one dimension of a technology dependency. In my talk at Summit this year, I covered a few different types of dependencies that entangle value streams. I mean, it's value stream entanglement almost. And it could be as distant looking as we share the same customer segment. And even though our businesses and internals have nothing other than that shared customer segment, we actually need to collaborate, because if I increase or decrease my services, that's impacting your part of the business, even though we have no software dependencies whatsoever.
Which is where
it changes our marketing.
It's where the containers model is nice, because it lets you deal with the multiple dimensionality of it. As it basically says, a container is something that provides a commonality amongst a group of people, right? So if I'm a member of a team, the team is a container. If I catch the same train to work as some other people at my organization, the fact that we all catch the same train line into work is a container. It's something that we have in common. If some of us work in one building, all the people who work in a building share a container. All the people who work on a floor share a container. All the people who like to eat lunch in the kitchen instead of going out for lunch share a container. And the whole notion of that model is to go recognize the containers that exist, right? And if you think about sort of Eric's comments on entanglement, you'd argue the entanglements are actually containers. And what they go on to say is that you can have strong containers and weak containers. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you can do in a human system is to choose containers that you want to strengthen because you feel that they contain a positive connection, and choose containers that you want to weaken because they create a negative connection. and then recognize that you can wind up drawing Venn diagrams because you can look at people who are members of a number of containers versus members who only are connected by their presence in a single container. And then the last piece of that, if you go, the people as the agents and the containers are the things that form some kind of connection between them. They then talk about the differences. And the differences being what cause evolution within the container as the agents bump into each other. So it's a fun one. It's well worth the read.
Yeah, you're getting into complexities, attractors and repulsors there.
Yeah.
Same concepts.
Yeah.
But I like the container-based view on it.
Actually, I use that. I've never called that containers, but when you look at this basic map, then usually what people are seeing in that map is a product kind of dependency. Like we are building a product and we have to work together to make that product, to create that product. Now, what I'm usually doing, and I'm just testing that whether this is the same idea of container that you had, is that I'm saying, hey, you usually have 5 different dependencies which matter. You have, of course, product dependencies. You have technical dependencies, meaning you are relying on the same architecture. You have infrastructure dependencies. For instance, you are relying on the same DevOps pipeline or something. Then you have your organizational dependencies, like you may still have a hierarchy in place and you have the same boss to report to or something. And you have the communication and collaboration dependencies, meaning it may be that people are working together to create a certain standard of communication and collaboration, even though they are not collaborating on the same product, but they are working together over boundaries in the organization to establish a certain communication and collaboration structure.
So all those are containers.
Okay, then I got it.
So your first model is kind of a one-dimensional. This is one dimension of container, which is a team or a solution area or a train or whatever, right? Arguably it's intended to be entrepreneurial network container. Then dependencies, right? Or sharing a common CI/CD pipeline or sharing a common architectural component. They're also things that draw them into the same container. So it's just a fun way to play.
For me, like the thinking behind, and I'm by far not far enough in the presentation to cover all these topics, but for me, the idea of fracture planes, like you want to identify where you can separate the system to reduce the complexity. When you look at these fracture planes, then when I'm using this word of container, then I have to look at different containers at the same time. And this is what I personally have seen, that it doesn't usually happen. So people are looking at one container saying, hey, this is the product and these are the dependencies, or this is the architecture and these are the dependencies, and here we can separate the thing. But when you really want to have good fracture planes, then you have to bring people together who are representing the different containers, so that you can find like the best option for several containers when you want to introduce a fracture plane.
Which
is that something that go with?
Sorry, I just, because I'm not as smart as you guys, I'm really struggling with the phrase fracture plane. What do you mean by that?
Sorry. So a fracture plane is actually covered in chapter 6 of Team Topologies. Like the chapter 6 of Team Topologies is all about fracture planes, and this is where I derived this wording from. Now, actually, you could say, if you want to get out of a monolith. So the first part of chapter 6 is about monoliths. Which kind of monoliths do we have? if you want to get out of monoliths, then you have to find fracture planes. And this idea is derived from masons who are like hitting a stone, and then the stone falls apart like into two pieces. And you have to identify fracture planes, because with the fracture planes you can then introduce APIs, and you can reduce the coupling and reduce the complexity of the whole system. So eventually, when you find more and more fracture planes where you can introduce APIs or whatever, then you get out of this monolith, and you are able to handle the whole system in a better way. Does that help, Saahil?
Yes, yeah, it does, and it makes sense, right? I would be curious how to extend that past the technology or hardware constraints of a system to, real like large solution design or value stream network design. Because I imagine that you could expand fracture planes further, right? And specifically around this containerization. What you're really saying is how do I containerize the people and technologies in a way that they can operate independently with cleanly defined fracture planes, such that there's, it's not necessarily simple, but easy to manage integrations between them.
Yes.
Yep.
And arguably there's a view, looks like Eric's back. Arguably there's a view that said if you superimposed multiple styles of container over a set of agents, that you could look at the overlaps and intersections between the different types of containers to help identify your fracture planes.
Yeah.
Oh, Eric, you are Mr. Robot, mate.
Of course I am.
What?
Am I clean?
Oh, no, you're still a robot.
Okay.
So maybe stay with video off and we'll see what we can get. So here's another question for you, Wolfgang, right? Now that we've go and read a new book, so you've got containers as a tool. But I can tell you her work's great. It's really enjoyable. The other question I'd ask is, I would have expected to see topologies turn up. Like, if you think about the layers of the views that you put there, and the idea that says, at level 1, I turn a group of people into a team, and then I represent that the team as a dot on the next layer. I would have felt like I wanted to be starting to identify topologies along the way, so that as I shifted a level of abstraction, I was maybe using different types of dots for different topologies. Because one of the things that I think was most powerful in Team Topologies wasn't so much just the language of the topology, but the content around the interaction patterns between the different topologies. And I think when you're looking at collaboration maps, being able to recognize, hey, these are the different topologies that we're recognizing at a different level of abstraction, and then imply some of the interaction patterns as we establish interfaces between them, feels like another layer of thinking I want to see on that map.
So thank you. So thank you. I have to include that. So I just make a note. And yes. So, but usually I start with that in a different way than what we are doing in SAFe. In SAFe, you're usually starting with the 4 types of teams, like enabling team, complicated subsystem team, stream-aligned team, and so on. So for me, I found that the harder way to identify teams in their topologies first. But it's the easier way for me to say, I have to find out the collaboration types between the teams and the solution areas. And when I have identified the way that they are collaborating, then I can derive the team topology from that. Like, it may not be obvious that, I don't know, I'm going here to say these are now teams, and so the red circles are teams, and these purple circles around are then solution areas. Now, it may not be obvious that this team, can you see my laser pointer when I'm using that here on, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Now you have this solution area here. This is the purple circle, and then within the solution area are the red circles, the teams, and the blue dots are the people working in the teams.
Yeah.
Now, it may not be obvious from, for instance, what this team is doing here, that this may be a complicated subsystem team. But when you look at the interactions that this team has with the other teams here in that solution area and this other team over there in the other solution area, then you may say that this is a complicated subsystem team derived from the information how the collaboration structures are actually like forming the, how should I describe that? Like, what is the daily interaction, so to speak, with this that this team has with the other teams?
Yeah.
And so, like, trying to come up with ideas of, in the first place, saying this is a streamlined team, this is a complicated subsystem team, just doesn't work that well for me. It's better for me to go first into the collaboration map, define the ways the teams or solution areas are communicating with other teams or solution areas, and then derive the team topologies from that. So the team topologies are just like a topping on a lot of work that you did before. It's not that you go to a team, say, oh, what you're doing, oh, you're a stream-aligned team probably, but you're deriving that from the bottom up, from the collaboration structure. Does that make sense?
I think that's I
Gary.
think that's an important gap that I see companies miss, because you're right, people do just go straight to looking at the work and saying what you should be. And I'm kind of distilling this perspective into is, first, do you collaborate? Second, like, why do you collaborate? What's the of it? And third, based on that, what rules and guidelines should you put around the collaboration? That's what the Team Topologies provides, is a common language for rules of collaboration. It's not a design tool, although it's very useful for capturing design.
Yeah. And I really think that teams, like the topology of one team, can change over time, even though they are not doing anything different, just because they have different ways of collaborating with other teams. So it's more like,
that gets into the evolution patterns that are towards the back of Team Topologies, and talking about like starting out as a deep collaboration and then spinning off so that other teams can consume while learning the next evolution, and being just very intentional as you evolve over time. What is the nature of the collaboration map your team is choosing? Rewind slightly, unless Mark wants to add something first.
Not far away.
So you start to speak. I did upload a copy of a variation of the chart talking about. It wasn't the original one that was as fully stream-aligned in terms of value streams and dependency chains. I'd have to dig that one out, but it's in the Miro board just below the other pictures I'm sharing.
Mhm.
So that's the design that I was talking about earlier, and I don't know if Mark's going to flip over or not, but
I am about to flip over. Okay.
Yep. And then the other thing, another book just to think about, Wolfgang, that's I think particularly relevant for the and what happens next part of this conversation, is Heidi Heflin's Dynamic Reteaming book.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you. I have to include that. Absolutely. I read that and I loved it.
Which diagram do you want me to zoom in on, Eric? It feels like probably the right-hand one.
Probably the left one.
The left
Yeah,
one
the
first?
circle one is probably better.
Yep.
The other one's interesting, but I killed my ability to see everybody else's video ninjas when trying to share mine blew up. I should have known better here.
I
So just
also
kind of
discovered you can't double subscribe to Video Ninja.
oh, you can't have two of them going.
No.
So anyway, so Wolfgang, this was kind of just a view as like what's the team's anchoring purpose in the middle, a quick view on what their internal and external working agreements are, and why they are members of the team. This is a very human-centric one, so we evolved the original almost architecture-centric one to be more human-centric as part of an exercise. So this is Veronica Roth and I collaborated on a couple years back. And then but it still has the where do we receive work from? Who's dependent on us? And who do we deliver to? Who are we dependent on? It's kind of working up and downstream. And then there's the service element. One of the things we built into here was the leadership team concept. So one of the things we were trying to do is evolve away from just technology creation teams and include the leadership team elements.
Yeah.
So the teams we serve are the teams that report to us as leaders, and the teams
Mhm.
we report up to are super circles. So we tried to build a collaboration map around the human dynamics that includes not just delivery teams, but also leadership teams, steering teams, all the other kind of things that muddy up the clarity of the value stream map in the enterprise. It's used at a couple places. I know at one big nonprofit that's worldwide recognized, it really helped a few of their teams clarify how they're collaborating with other teams and made a big difference. It's maybe an interesting one as a data gathering.
It looks a lot like this, like business model for teams. Like this is the German edition, but business model for teams. Did you read that?
Never seen it.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah, that's
it's derived from the normal
very
business. Mhm.
now variations of it. It's not really derived from any of the canvases or popular ones. It's derived from work 10 to 15 years ago of just helping teams visualize who they are and what they're doing. Like I was probably playing with this in 2008 or 9 as part of the Kanban work I did.
Great. I love
Um,
that. Thank you.
That's a nice visual.
Yeah,
it's
and then if
really
you just go
cool.
to
Will you
the other
throw a
one, Jen,
link
if you
to?
just scroll to the right. Oh, that's the hill. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to ask for a link to this. Like, I know we
It's,
can get it on
it's
the Miro, but if we can put a link to a source in the Twitch stream, I think that would be cool.
Um,
I suspect
my
this is
Miro.
this is our it's probably the prod for us to start thinking about getting the Shaping Agility site and library up.
Yeah.
Activating some of the plots that we've laid and have not yet activated.
Mm.
Yep. So I'm gonna. We're at our theoretically official time box, so I might suggest we close this topic, and you two or three can move on to another topic if you'd like.
I
Um,
I wouldn't mind calling things towards a wrap. It's been a very big week for me.
Sure.
Yeah, I've had a big week.
That works for me. Can I just before we abandon this topic because I haven't can I drop one seed question for next time or something that we can discuss offline
Hey, why don't we do
and
at
offer
least
more guidance on?
why don't we do at least 5 minutes of Saahil? You haven't found your way back
Yeah.
in.
No, I'm sorry. I know we want to drop, so I don't want to talk, but I loved this conversation. I feel like I learned a lot because this is not a space that I spend a ton of time in. But connecting it back to Wolfgang's original point of value stream networks and is the collaboration map a good way to iterate on that? I'm struggling to see how you would take something like this at a team level or a solution area level and extend it all the way to a value stream. I can see how you would form a train around it. I can see how you would form a solution train around it. But unless we're saying that, a solution train is a one-to-one mapping with the value stream, and I don't think we are, I I think at scale, this is challenging.
You're right.
So it's
Absolutely.
probably it's probably
Everything's
Go down to
something
your third,
for another conversation.
everything's challenging
go
at
down to your
scale.
third scaling level, Wolfgang.
Maybe a couple of words to that, because yes, you're absolutely right. This is not the way to value stream mapping, and I don't want to invalidate other ways, or it's for me just a different aspect of value streams, because people have to collaborate on larger things. Now, is it hard to derive value streams from that? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not really deriving value streams from that. It's more like it's a different angle to look at the whole thing. So usually I have a couple of different angles which I start with, and then a couple more where I go deeper in. Like collaboration maps are just one angle. The other angle is like the product, like saying, okay, how is the product created? This is the usual thing what we associate with value stream mapping. Then I'm also looking at customer journeys, saying, okay, if we are interacting with a customer, this probably also means that there is a certain impact to the way we are creating value.
Yeah.
And a fourth thing is that I'm going into the waste discussion, just saying, hey, where is waste actually happening in the company? Because this was the original meaning of value stream mapping, saying, hey, we have to eliminate waste. And from the waste mapping, saying, oh, there is waste happening and there's waste happening, then you can see like the two leading steps leading into that waste, and the 1-2 steps coming out of that waste. And from that, you get a very fragmented landscape, but you are focusing on the waste. Now, from these 4 pillars, usually you can derive a much better understanding of what the value stream network actually should look like. But there are a lot more topics that you could look in to get a better understanding. But just from the collaboration maps, deriving value streams, I wouldn't do that. This is probably too hard.
But I think the quid pro quo is, if you use value streams by themselves, you also get into trouble.
Yes.
So,
Right?
so I want to
Sorry, Eric.
argue. I'm gonna disagree with you both, and actually, Mark, this is a good time gently to the right to that next diagram. I do use this to decide where to draw my value stream boundaries. And I don't want to say value stream mapping, because I see that as a very different thing.
Mm.
But I will use the third level of collaboration map to decide, where do I want to declare strategy and funding boundaries, which is, when we talk about development value streams, essentially what we're doing. And I also have 4 pillars, but they're different than Wolfgang's, amusingly. But overlapping, there's product centric, which is what I call the user journey. There's solution centric, which is the technology assemblages necessary to implement and satisfy that user journey. And there's work centric, which is how do we think about initiatives and deploying the things we want to change across the enterprise. All of which are valid considerations for how do you want to shape value stream boundaries. And there's another picture of this somewhere in a document that has 9 dots around it that shows different anchoring points you can choose in different parts of your enterprise as balances and trade-offs between these. The vertical dimension, which I'll probably get rid of in future, is whether you want to make a big leap forward or you're going to allow yourself to be constrained by the current organization design, and how far are you willing to change in one step while doing that, because the current state is a valid consideration as you look into your value stream funding design. Too much change is painful.
So knowing that we're trying to wrap up, and I feel like we've just opened up a very fun conversation. And
maybe we can put going through this 4-page white paper on a future stream backlog then.
Well, I was just wondering, given that our next topic was value streams as a tool of change, or new product value streams as a transformation tool, whether next week we start with new product value streams as a transformational tool with an intent to dive back here because I'm sure that's going to be a very natural relationship.
Let's I might ask that we drop that for 2 weeks where I can be stable and not thinking about having to rush to the airport.
All right, let's do that. 2 weeks from now, that is our topic.
Great.
That's great because I actually can't be here next week.
All right, so I'm going to go stop stream and then let's just debrief for a couple of minutes.
You want to do a quick summary of what we talked about on camera? Or?
What did we talk about? We tortured Saahil about the 5 key aspects of enterprise
Oh, it
portfolio
was not
management.
torture at all. You've expanded my thinking.
I think we tortured him over the first one and never let him talk about the other 4, just to be clear. But
Well, this is true, right? And then we saw 59,000 slides from Wolfgang of variations of collaboration map. And that was actually, for me, they're both fun conversations. You know,
You can say you
portfolio
liked
and company.
Wolfgang's more. That's okay.
No, I love the strategy discussion. I really enjoy that stuff. And I thought the model Eric shared with us as a way of framing, when are we talking about formation versus articulation versus deployment, I think there's interesting patterns in leveraging that model. So I got good new brainwaves out of the first conversation. The second conversation was probably not so much for me. Good new brainwaves is going, hey, here's the thing I love to talk about. Like, how do you understand the way an organization works? And I think for me, the lovely aspect of Wolfgang's collaboration maps was to go build a deep understanding of today and the way people collaborate today before we design a new tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a lovely little diagram from Eric for team charters and interactions. So that was the wrap for me. Anybody else? Something to add to the quick wrap of today?
Maybe just a summary wrap for me is one of the things I notice us talking more and more about that I value deeply is iterating towards a usefully shareable common language for some of these really abstract things. And I'm just reminded of, I think it was a Jeffrey Moore quote of around strategy for just how there isn't a language for concepts this abstract.
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point we're starting to create one, and we're having richer and deeper conversations through that. And it just continues to remind me of the power of a common language and the ability to collaborate more effectively.
So for me, there are 2 things to add. The one thing is, while we were speaking about portfolio management, I had the idea that maybe we could create a list together with suggestions from each one of us saying, hey, if you want to go deeper, if you want to be able to follow the conversation that we are having, so these are the resources or the books that we are relying mostly on. I don't know whether we can do that, like with a comprehensive list and not maybe 1,000 book titles. But this was also when Saahil asked about fracture planes and things. Like this is something that I'm using so naturally that it doesn't really occur to me that this actually came from a book. But there are probably a lot of things also for LPM where we are using terms that people might not know if they are watching the streams. And so like giving them a hint where they could look things up, or what are the 3 or 5 most important books every one of us would recommend. I think that could help. So that adds to the resource library that you spoke of, Mark. And the second thing is, now I got a couple of ideas out of this conversation, which I hadn't had before in like creating a next version of the slide deck that I shared. Now, I would love to include somewhere on the slides shaping agility and the streams, just like to acknowledge that I'm not just coming up on my own with all the ideas, but that I derived it from the conversations. Would that be okay for everyone if I put that on occasionally on slides, saying, "Hey, this is."
I think that's a conversation for off the air,
Yeah.
because it starts to be, the when are we going public conversation, which we are starting to need to have more urgently. So Saahil, you get to give us our sign off words.
I don't have any new insights to offer. Just I continue to appreciate being a part of this community and conversation. And I can't wait for our next stream.